Hi, I'm Jessica Allville, and I'm really excited to be able to read with you today. I'm going to be reading an essay from Lamott, specifically an essay from her book, Traveling Mercies. Most of her essays are about her faith and her life and lessons that she learned. They're funny and insightful, and I think they're pretty enjoyable. So I'm excited to share them with you. So I'm going to be reading an essay called Grace, and I will just jump in. There's something so graceful about a huge, unwieldy person who has found a way to glide. I remember Marlon Brando ice skating a few years ago in the Freshmen, massive and shy and full of grace out there on the rink. Or Jackie Gleason, shooting such great stick at the pool table in The Hustler, strolling around the table to take each new shot in total presence, total command. And there's something so graceful about a skinny little kid with poor coordination who's running in a gangly, goony way, arms akimbo, knees knocking, this hopeless little kid who will always be picked last in school, but who's just so happy to be running around so fast, running the exact way she's running. I know more about Grace than I did 2 weeks ago. For instance, that Auden was right when he wrote, "I know nothing, except what everyone knows. If there when Grace dances, I should dance." I know because she was. And I did. 2 weeks ago, I was on stage with Grace Paley, and don't ask how someone like me got to share the stage with someone like her. Maybe it is simply that sometimes, out of the blue, the water boy gets to toss the ball around with the quarterback. And I danced. But the thing is that since I've admired her my whole life, I desperately wanted to dance beautifully, and I didn't. I was a little like Peter Boyle in Young Frankenstein putting on the Ritz. But I did dance because when all else fails, you follow instructions. I understand that Auden meant grace in the theological sense, meant it as the force that infuses our lives and keeps letting us off the hook. It is unearned love, the love that goes before, that greets us on the way. I love that. It's the help you receive when you have no bright ideas left, when you are empty and desperate and have discovered that your best thinking and most charming charm have failed you. Grace is the light or electricity or juice or breeze that takes you from that isolated place and puts you with others who are as startled and embarrassed and eventually grateful as you are to be there. But had he meant grace in the literary sense, he would have been referring to Grace Paley. In 1970, when I was 16, the women's movement had just burst into the general public awareness. I am someone who can say with all sincerity that I owe my life to the movement. But as it first emerged from New York, much of its gospel was defined by grown-up daughters who did not want to risk having anything in common with their mother's entrapment. And as a result, some of the language of the early movement contained an ugly rejection of mothers, of motherhood, of softness, of wanting to be in deep relationships with men. But at the same time, coming out of New York from the tenements and the village and the anti-war movement was a short story writer whose work taught me that you could be all the traditional feminine things: a mother, a lover, a listener, a nurturer. And you could also be critically astute and radical and have a minority opinion that was profoundly moral. You could escape the fate of your mother, become who you were born to be, and succeed in the world without having to participate in traditionally male terms, without hardness, coldness, one-upmanship, without having to compete and come out the winner. She was beautiful, zaftig, and powerful. She was a mother. She was in love. She was a combative pacifist. That was Grace Paley. I used to almost pant like a thirsty dog when I'd have a new story of hers to read. I drink up her generosity, the radical wisdom in her stories, the wonderful sense of perspective grounded in self-forgiveness. She pointed out her own flaws and foibles, but it was clear that she was not bogged down in them, not caught up in the small stuff. Foibles are not worth hating. That was the point. What was worth hating were poverty, injustice, war, the killing of our sons and brothers. She's still beautiful in her mid-70s with that dandelion hair and her no-nonsense voice. She reminds me of a durable desert shrub that the wind just can't blow over. Low to the ground, yet with leaves whose lacy intricacies surprise you. And I love that she eats with such pleasure. She and I had a snack the first afternoon. Her husband puttered around their hotel room while she and I ate. He picked at a salad and bread with no butter. She ordered and ate a plate of sliced fruits, pretty as stained glass. But she also sneaked a lot of shoestring potatoes off my plate, hoping her distracted husband wouldn't notice, and she clearly relished them. We were scheduled to do 2 nights together in a row in cities several hundred miles apart. The producers of the events, working together, wanted us to read from our work, then give prepared talks from the podium. But this seemed so controlled, not allowing for improvisation or flights of fancy. An idea lodged in my head. Why not let us be together in front of the audience, a couple of funny, feisty women hanging out together, jamming? I was sure that this was the way to go. We'll see how it goes. I had to convince the first producer to give us a shot at this. I've been giving variations on the same talk for a long time now, and it was beginning to make me feel like Peggy Fleming skating to a medley of songs from Fiddler on the Roof. Perhaps this is what Fleming's audience would want to see, left to their own devices. We often want what is smooth and familiar and instantly warm. Mostly, we do not want to pay to watch someone sit with the nervous abyss on stage. I do not think that most people want to see Peggy Fleming skate to Carmina Burana or even Ladysmith Black Mambazo. I saw Peter, Paul, and Mary recently in concert. I wanted to hear them sing The Great Mandala. I became frustrated and somewhat bitter when Paul Stuckey began to sing an interminable new song about the internet. So I hoped that the fire of truth would catch between Grace and me. The producer gave us a chance to make this happen. It didn't. Grace and I read from our own works for a while, and then we sat down to have a nice, intimate conversation with 2,000 people watching. And it was a weird, glumpy dance, a private dance done publicly. We totally bombed. No, wait, that is not actually the truth. I bombed. Grace was fine. Apparently, I went on too long every time I opened my mouth. Also, I dominated the conversation, and according to one audience member's written comments, was shrill and narcissistic. But I couldn't hear the music. I couldn't remember how to play my own song. I felt frantic and frozen at the same time. So instead of something bold and improvisational and fabulous dance attire, the audience saw me do the St. Vitus two-step in tap shoes and a straitjacket. Grace thought it had been just fine. It was what it was, she shrugged. But I knew it hadn't gone well. Even her husband said it had been a disaster. And my fear of failure has been lifelong and deep. If you are what you do, and I think my parents may have accidentally given me this idea, and you do poorly, what then? It's over. You're wiped out. All those prophecies you heard in the dark have come true, and people can see the real you, see what a fraud you are. Alone in my hotel room that night, I felt stricken and lurky and dark, a wallflower at the vampire's ball. I cried a little, then closed my eyes, bowed my head, and whispered, "Help." Out of nowhere, I remembered something one of my priest friends had said once, that grace is having a commitment to, or at least an acceptance of, being ineffective and foolish. That our bottled charm is the main roadblock to drinking that clear, cool glass of love. I remembered what Grace's stories were all about, self-forgiveness and taking care of one another. It wasn't far away from Jesus saying to feed his sheep. Now, I'm not positive he meant room service, but maybe he did. So I ate strawberries and melon and cookies, then put on the heat and got in the tub. It was amazing. I do not at all understand the mystery of grace, only that it meets us where we are, but does not leave us where it found us. It can be received gladly or grudgingly, in big gulps or in tiny tastes, like a deer at the salt. I gobbled it, licked it, held it down between my little hooves. The review in the newspaper the next day was not very good. But by then I'd figured out the gift of failure, which is that it breaks through all that held breath and isometric tension about needing to look good. It's the gift of feeling floppier. One of the things I've been most afraid of had finally happened, with a whole lot of people watching, and it had indeed been a nightmare. But sitting with all that vulnerability, I discovered I could write it. I felt ungainly, the way Marlon Brando looked on those ice skates. But at least I was back on my feet. I'd come through. I don't know why life isn't constructed to be seamless and safe, why we make such glaring mistakes, things fall so short of our expectations, and our hearts get broken, and our kids do scary things. I don't know why it's not more like it is in the movies. Why things don't come out neatly and lessons can't be learned when you're in the mood for learning them. Why love and grace often come in such a motley packaging. But I was reminded of the lines of D.H. Lawrence that are taped to the wall of my office. What is the knocking? What is the knocking at the door in the night? It is someone who wants to do us harm. No. It is the three strange angels. Admit them. Admit them. And by the time I arrived in the second city where Grace and I would perform, I understood that failure is surely one of these three strange angels. When both Grace and I, and the second producer, let me try that line again. When both Grace and the second producer said they wanted to go back to plan A, reading prepared talks from the podium, I said, okay. I just decided to cooperate. And the evening went really well. Grace was honest and sweet and tough, and she made everyone in the audience feel like going out and fighting the great good fight. Also, she's absolutely the only woman I know who can wear socks with fancy shoes and a dress and still look great. It's the beauty of comfort. She shone. I was just me, which Grace said later was all anyone had asked. I'd really wanted to be Sid Charisse on stage. But as usual, if I'd gotten what I wanted, I would have shortchanged myself. What I wanted was acclaim, and what I got was Grace, lovely and plain in her faded dress and dark socks, smiling at me all night. That's the end of that essay. Thanks for listening. I'm excited to read with you again soon.